All right, it's a pleasure to be with all of you today. This is such a great topic to discuss. And as Executive Director of Families First in Minnesota, I get the opportunity to see this investment on a daily basis. We run Head Start, as Barb alluded to, and we see young children who come from challenged financial backgrounds in which many families have English as a second language. They enter our program kind of in tough spots, and they leave as confident children who are eager to take the next step in their education. Recipients of our early learning scholarships get the benefit of a $7,500 annual scholarship that can allow them to be better prepared for early education and go on to kindergarten. Children in our crisis nursery program are often in unsafe, challenged environments, and they get an opportunity to write their lives, and their parents get the opportunity to focus on their jobs and make sure their kids are safe. So there are a lot of wonderful things going on, but there are also a lot of challenges out there. Those of us in this room know the benefits of early childhood education for all. Most brain development starts before age 5. Children who participate in high-quality early childhood programs experience positive, lasting effects on IQ scores, along with lower incidence of obesity, chronic illness, and incarceration. Earnings are higher for those who have been enrolled in early childhood programs. Plus, their parents can concentrate on their work when they know their children are safe and learning. Finally, we live in a global economy. We all want these children to grow up to be productive members of society and help us with something that weighs on me these days. I want these young children to be successful in life so I can have my Social Security be funded. Finally, we live in a global society. We need the next generation to be competitive with others around the globe. That is just vital in today's world. As Barb said, my background is in journalism. I think we've got a great story to tell in early childhood. We've got an opportunity to tell business leaders and legislators why they should invest in early education. Many of them are looking for bottom line reasons to increase their investments. How about these? The Perry Preschool study dating back to the 60s shows that high quality preschool brings higher graduation rates, less need for special ed, more home ownership, higher earnings, and less time in prison. Plus, an estimated $29 million in wages are lost in the U.S. on an annual basis by working families who do not have access to affordable childcare and paid family and medical leave. Childcare and early education are unaffordable for millennials in all 50 states. Think about that. Unaffordable for the folks who are having children today in every part of the country. Unemployment in Minnesota sits around 3%, an unprecedented number in my lifetime. Minnesota could get a competitive advantage in the workplace by offering incentives to parents who need affordable care and early education. About 60% of funding for childcare in this country comes directly from parents, while families pay only 23% of the cost of a college education. Doesn't it make sense to invest in early education? And finally, funding for early learning scholarships has gone from $7 million to $70 million in the last 6 years. But we're really only scratching the surface. Just in the 28 counties in which our agency administers early learning scholarships, we have hundreds of people on the waiting list for those scholarships. Now is the time to invest. We need all of you to help us tell that story. So I want to bring our panelists up front. So one of our panelists is running a bit late, and Senator Pratt will hopefully join us shortly. But we'll start here with Barb Fabre, and she'll make some opening remarks and introduce herself, and we'll move down the line.
Bonjour. Can you hear me?
No.
No? Okay. Okay, I gotta talk into the mic. Bonjour and good morning. Happy to be here. My name is Barb Fabre, and I am from the White Earth Reservation, which is about 4 hours from here, if you're not familiar with it. And I am CEO of Indigenous Visioning, my own consulting company that I started 30 years, after 30 years of working with the White Earth tribe in early childhood. And I'm also a consultant with Close the Gap by 5. And I think that's just the introduction.
All right.
Good morning. Good morning.
You have to talk like right into it.
Okay, now is it? Okay. Good morning. I'm Stacey Stout. I'm Director of Education and Workforce Development at the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce. We have over 2,300 member businesses, all over the state from different sectors, most of whom are small to medium-sized companies, 100 employees or fewer. And one of the main concerns is the worker shortage, and of course it's being compounded by our childcare shortage. So I'm happy to be here today.
Hi, y'all can excuse I'm getting over a cold. My name is Charles Sutton. I'm the Senior Outreach Director for U.S. Senator Eric Pratt. I cover a number of issues in my portfolio, including education and early childhood.
All right, we'll start with some questions from the panelists, and we'll leave time at the end for lots of questions from you folks as well. First of all, for Barb, how are you targeting resources to the most vulnerable children playing out in tribal communities and in general rural communities? What can the rest of the state learn from tribal communities, rural communities when it comes to targeting resources?
Well, as you know, in rural Minnesota, resources are very limited. And White Earth was very fortunate to administer the Race to the Top grant when that first Minnesota received that. And that worked very, very well. We were able to offer the early learning scholarships to families and at the same time create capacity for the parents to use the scholarships. So with us, as a tribal nation, we are a sovereign nation, which means we have government relationships with the state of Minnesota, and we're able to do our own tribal licensing of childcare providers. So when Race to the Top came, we all providers were in a process of getting rated, parent-aware rated. So we worked with our childcare providers and then to get them rated, but then as new people came on and the word got out about how wonderful the scholarships are and how wonderful parent-aware rating was, more and more providers wanted to become rated. So we worked with them. We had an on-staff early childhood educator and our tribal licensor, and they worked hand in hand with our childcare providers to create the capacity. And it worked out wonderful. Then the new providers that came on, it's not that we made parent-aware mandatory once you're a tribally licensed childcare provider on the White Earth Reservation, but we highly and strongly encouraged it. And we supported them throughout the process, and it was a wonderful thing. Then we had more and more providers that were county licensed or state licensed contact us and say, you know, we're not enrolled members of your tribe, but we would like to get licensed by the tribe. So we then went to our tribal council and said, can we license non-members on the reservation? Because a lot of our children were in those homes, and we want to make sure that they're receiving high quality care. And so the tribal council agreed, and so we had probably about 5-6 providers. And White Earth is the size, it's about 1,300 square miles. And right now, I believe out of 21 licensed childcare sites, I believe 19 of them are rated. And so we've got a concentrated area of high quality early childhood settings. And the scholarships really, really helped us and helped families put their child in a high quality program. And as you know, Native Americans unfortunately have the highest number for the achievement gap, for dropout rates, low graduation, out-of-home placements. So tribal communities are pockets of poverty, extreme poverty. are financially challenged communities, like John said. And so we need to give them, we need to offer as many resources as possible to get children into these high quality early childhood settings.
Thank you. Senator Pratt, welcome.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I'm sorry I got caught in traffic as I'm watching my Google Maps click up. I made a frantic call that, oh my gosh, I'm going to be a little late. So let me just do a quick introduction. My name is Eric Pratt. I'm in my second term in the State Senate, representing Scott County, the communities of Shakopee, Jordan, Prior Lake, and 6 townships. I was chair of the Education Policy Committee, and will now be taking over the chairmanship of the Jobs and Economic Development Committee. So thank you for having me today, and again, my apologies.
We've got a question for you.
Is that the jump right into the fire?
You bet.
All right, let's go.
So the legislature is set to convene on January 8th. The state has an expected $1 billion surplus. Do you believe early childhood education is a top priority for investing with short and long-term funds? And where do you think we're headed on this issue with split control of state government?
Oh, you gave me the easy question. I haven't had a chance to, again, we're just in the transition part, and I'm reaching out to my counterparts on the Jobs Committee in the House as those chairmanships change. Here's what I can tell you about our caucus in the Senate, is that early childhood, I think, is going to be a priority, and really, has been. And we've had a tremendous champion in Representative Jen Loon, pushing for scholarships to really help and target where we need help. My concern is that in a split legislature, we're going to have some of the same battles that we've had over the last few years, and that is whether or not we target those funds to students in need, or whether we continue to invest in school-based universal programs. And I think it's going to be interesting to see where the governor-elect comes out and where the House really decides to go with that issue. But I think you will see some, at least from our caucus, you'll continue to see a continued support for targeted scholarships. Quite honestly, and Senator Bill Weber has been having some listening tours, really focused in Greater Minnesota on the access to quality childcare. And I think that's something that we've also got to take a look at, is to make sure that I'm hearing more and more often that it's the regulations, it's the in fact, I was just in Shakopee as the Department of Health was out, Department of Human Services was out talking to our local child care providers about the new regulations and licensing rules that they would have to go through. And these women really want to have their businesses grow and thrive, and they want to, and God, they really have wonderful, wonderful hearts. I've been to home-based gatherings where they're looking at curriculum and really focused on making sure that their students are kindergarten ready when they get there. We just need to be able to continue to foster and create an environment that will allow these families to become entrepreneurs in this area and continue to thrive. Was there another part of the question I missed?
I think you did well. Thank you. And Stacey.
Okay.
Okay, so a question for you is, I'm getting the impression that early childhood is becoming an issue gaining interest in the business community, finally. Also, what kind of economic case regarding early childhood education makes sense to businesses today? Do businesses understand the need to invest now to guarantee they have workers in the future?
Yes, yeah, okay. It doesn't sound the same up here. So yes, I would say that the business community, it's not gaining interest, it is there. They are fully aware and concerned about the childcare shortage. The business community really sees this in two ways. One, it's not just about, it is about the current shortage and helping current potential employees find reliable childcare so that they can get into the jobs that are available right now. And it's also about the preparation of our future workforce. So that's why it's so important that we have quality, accessible, affordable childcare in every community. And the business community really understands that this is an economic development issue as well. And so, but as I mentioned earlier, most of our businesses have 100 employees or fewer. And so while it would be ideal if they could provide childcare or something like that, it's not a realistic option for many small businesses. So it really is something they're looking at with their communities and hoping that they can address it so that a number of people can benefit across sectors and communities. And so that's the availability piece. I think the other piece that would go to that, though, is more funding for scholarships, because scholarships are what will allow families who want to pursue open positions to put their child in a childcare setting that best meets their needs. The school-based program is a part-time, part-year program. That does not meet many families' needs. And if we really want to close the achievement gap, then families need to be able to find a childcare setting that allows them to be in a job that's rewarding to them, which is probably more than just a part-time, part-year job. If they want a full-time job and they want to better the lives for themselves and their family, then they need to be able to find a childcare setting where they can do that. And that is why scholarships are so important, because that allows them choice. This also goes to cultural issues. If somebody wants to choose a setting that meets their culture, they need that choice. And if you're only putting it in one setting where it's for all for everybody, and that's the school-based setting, then you're not giving them that choice. The other challenge I see with the school-based setting is that we have an achievement gap. And if you give everybody the same, saying we're going to give every family, no matter what your background is, no matter what your income is, that achievement gap just stays the same. You're giving everybody the same. And I don't know why we would not invest our dollars to those families with the greatest need to help them come up so that everybody is starting kindergarten ready. That is where we are going to see the greatest impact on closing the achievement gap. So the business community feels very strongly about this. It's a current workforce shortage problem as well as a future workforce shortage problem.
Thank you. All right, Charles, Senator Smith has made early education one of her core topics of interest since she took office. With split government coming to Washington in January, what is the likelihood that an investment in early childhood can move through Congress? Where does it sit on the list of priorities? And can you share some of Senator Smith's efforts focused on early childhood in her first few months in office?
Yeah, thank you, John. So it's always dangerous to prognosticate for Congress, but I think there's some real, if you look at sort of the past year, I think there's some real signs that this has become, that there is some real strong bipartisan interest in Congress in making investments in early childhood. We saw with the budget deal that came together earlier this year that they actually almost doubled the amount of funding in the CCDBG program, so the Childcare Development Block Grant, which is the main source of federal funding. This was the largest increase ever from Congress, and it was a bipartisan budget deal. So that was really exciting. That was something Senator Smith pushed hard for. There were also some increases, not quite as much, but an increase in funding for Head Start as well. And so I think through that, I think that speaks to the fact that there is some bipartisan appetite. It will be interesting to see what happens, obviously, with the House switch in leadership. I expect that early childhood will be a priority for for House leadership going forward, and hopefully will continue to be something that's supported on a bipartisan basis going forward. But I think, we can talk about it later, but I think, the work that advocates have done to push on this issue and to make it known to leadership on both parties how important it is for communities has really paid off, and I think we saw that with the budget deal. In terms of Senator Smith, she was pushing hard for more funding for CCDVG. She also led a tour around Minnesota. Her and her staff, when she was in Washington, we traveled to over a dozen communities throughout Minnesota, met with providers, parents, advocates, local experts, folks from the initiative foundations, which if you're doing work in Greater Minnesota are really focused on this issue, and had conversations about what are some of the challenges around access and supply, as well as affordability and quality. And so Senator Smith has introduced a bill, the Childcare Supply Improvement Act, which would help provide some technical assistance, loans, mentoring, and more funding, really for some infrastructure, because we know, especially in Greater Minnesota, one of the challenges is just a lack of slots available, and for new childcare providers, it can often be challenging to get facilities up to standards, and for folks that are providing the care in their homes, that often requires some changes there, and making sure that they have some of those resources, as well as some of the for family-based providers, they are also running that business, and so oftentimes they need what can be beneficial. And something I've heard is some of that support in terms of some of that back end. So a lot of the processing and just sort of that back end technical assistance about running a business. That's really needed, and often is something that is new to family-based providers. So working to provide some of that support there as well.
Thank you, Charles. All right, we've got another question that I'd like to ask of all of you, and we'll start with Barb. We have research showing the large societal benefits to investing in early childhood education, yet it's still not getting done to the extent it needs to be. What are the challenges, or what are the barriers to investing additionally in early childhood?
Well, I believe we need to have the parent voice down at the legislature. And Close the Gap by 5 is funding a tribal tour. We're doing a tribal tour of all 11 tribes, including the metro area, and talking to parents, talking to communities, talking to childcare providers. And we also have many people on that tour with us. Mini Minds is there. We have Senator Tina Smith's staff there. And we're talking to communities about their needs in the tribal communities, and we're hearing a lot of the same issues. There's not enough childcare providers. It's very limited. There's like Stacey said, it is an economic development issue, and so I believe that. We just need to get more parents and providers to talk to their legislators to tell them the importance of it. And like Stacey said, it is, we need to get funding out there and resources out there for the most needy families. And we need to have it flexible. So as our tour is going, we visited eight communities so far, tribal communities. And it's amazing, and what we're hearing, what we heard from one tribe is nobody ever talks to us, nobody ever asks us our opinion, and they're feeling very isolated. So having that community outreach has been very, very important and needed, much needed. But I think that our legislators, I talked to a legislator just a couple months ago, and he said it is a bipartisan issue. When we're talking about children and childcare and even scholarships, it is a bipartisan issue, and he was a Republican legislator. And so we're talking about kids here. It shouldn't be an issue of we don't have enough money or we're competing with Muse Arts, a stadium. We're talking about kids. We're talking about the future of our state, and so we have so many we have limited resources, but we also have a lot of issues that our families are facing. And so, with the opiate addiction and tearing apart our families, our communities, these extra resources are needed. And we have to get our children in high quality early learning settings. We have to have trauma-informed care. We all know about adverse childhood experiences and how that affects the developing child. And lastly, when research tells us that by age 3, 80% of the brain is developed, what does that say? We need to get our young children, our at-risk children, into these high-quality early learning settings to get them ready for school. I want to close the achievement gap. I want to go, reverse historical trauma. And so I think high-quality early childhood settings and making it available and affordable is our only hope.
Senator Pratt. Well, thank you, and that's a really good question. And by the way, I'm a Republican legislator too. So.
All right, I'll be talking to you.
I might take a little bit different tact on this in that, and maybe it just comes from my business and banking background, right? But when I think about the problem with childcare, I think back to my own family. My kids are 21 and 23 right now, but we had them in preschool, and a really fabulous one in Prior Lake called Little Acres, which was run by Miss Karen. It was her own little staff, and she did a great job. And I'll never forget when my daughter graduated, and we have something called Board Scholars. When I looked at all the kids that went up and got their Board Scholar pin, I went, that's a Little Acres kid, that's a Little Acres kid, that's a Little Acres kid. It's clear, right, that these kids got a great start and were able to progress through. But now let's kick it ahead 20 years. I just talked to a child care provider who, after 30 years of business in her location, is now being told that her facility's inadequate, that she's got too many kids in a room, that she's had kids in forever. She's got to start turning families away in order to get her counts down. We've got overregulation in this area. And quite honestly, it's overregulation in a way that is not hurting the kids. It's not impacting their ability to learn. It's bureaucratic rules that are getting in the way of teachers doing a great job with students and with children. And so what does that do? Go back 20 years, my wife, who has a really good job and makes more than the average person, her entire paycheck was going to childcare and preschool for a period of time. And so I get the desire, I get the reaction to say, boy, we should have free childcare. But we have families and means that are able to do this. Stacey's exactly right. If it's costing a family more than they make to put their child in childcare to go get that job, to fill one of those vital needs that we have in a low unemployment environment, then we've lost that ability then to incent that person to go get that job and to improve their, particularly to improve their position. And so for me, I think the issue is going to be around access and affordability, and making sure that families can afford it. And I think that goes to what most of the people on the panel are saying, is targeting those resources to the families that are most in need, to make sure that it's affordable so that they can join the workforce, so that they can, and particularly in greater Minnesota and in the urban cities, to make sure that some of these low-income families that are in generational poverty have a way to move out of that and improve their life. And so that's, I think that's some of the opportunity that we have, targeting those resources, but also making sure that we allow providers to do a good job in such a way that when they go out to the new DHS website, I'll tell you, as a parent, if I went out and I saw this provider and I saw these violations, I would think twice before sending my child there, without knowing that these are just bureaucratic rules on the number of kids that they've got in a room. And a room that, quite honestly, has been effective and legal for 30 years. So I think we've got to step back, and I would like to see the state and the new Department of Health look at being more of a partner with providers than a regulator.
Well, I think I agree with what's been said up here, and especially when Barb says this is a bipartisan issue. Everyone agrees that we need to be investing in early education. There is no disagreement there. Where we want to see the public investment, though, is where we're going to get the greatest return on investment. Everybody wants that from their tax dollars. They want to see a return that will bring about the best results. And I know that we've talked about the scholarship method, and I don't want to harp on that, but it truly is the way that we are going to see those with the greatest need benefit the most. And that's, so I think when we're talking about public investment, that's where we need to start. It needs to be tied to quality, of course, because that's the goal, is so that these students or these children are in a high quality setting. So when they start school, they're ready. But in addition to that, we have to make sure those providers are in every community, and that's the other challenge. So when we talk about public investment, I think it's key that we are funding scholarships tied to quality ratings, and also we need to be investing in the provider side. And so there have been grants through DEED. It did, unfortunately, there was not funding this past year, but the 2 previous years there was $500,000 each year, and communities could apply for those grants. And we're still seeing the outcomes from those, but from what we've seen, communities are making good use of that, and there has to be a local match, which I think is important because you get the buy-in. But that's another piece of this that I think public investment is a wise use of tax dollars in those communities, because you're helping them figure out where to provide, but you're also, if you're investing in the scholarships, then those families are able to put their input and say, yes, you are serving us in the way we need to be served. And so they are also supporting it by sending their children to those providers.
Thank you, Charles.
Yeah. So sometimes I think when we're thinking about these questions, I think it is worth sort of stepping back and acknowledging how far I think the conversation has come. I think over the past 10, 15 years, public awareness has really, really increased in terms of the awareness of the research around brain development, the work around the return on investment and what it means to be investing. And I think that is reflected in the fairly strong bipartisan consensus and support that this should be an area of focus and an area that is going to be important to invest in. So I sometimes we think about how far we have to go, and I think it's worth at least sort of stepping back and saying, we have come quite far in terms of bringing that public awareness to the table. At the same time, to answer the actual question, what do we need to go forward? I think some of the challenges are always going to be scale. The size of the challenge is big, and so it's about oftentimes taking programs that are working and finding ways to expand and grow them to meet the needs and to meet the size of the challenge. I think the other piece of it is that is that there still is some perception out there. We hear from providers and especially family-based providers that there still can be a perception out there that what they're doing is babysitting, and folks here know that that's not the case. That they are providing really high-quality early childhood education, and finding a way to get that out there and changing that perception about what it is that's happening is really, I think, going to be key in terms of sustaining that focus and that interest in early childhood.
All right, we're going to turn this program over to the audience now. Meredith here has a microphone, and she will take your questions. Who's got a question for our panel?
Brandon Toner with Deed. Thanks for Stacey for shouting out our program. We've had a lot of success with that program. We've created somewhere between, I'm actually just getting the information in today for our latest demo, somewhere 1,000 childcare slots. These are really good investments. It's lowering the barrier to entry for these businesses to start or expand. But one of our concerns is we want to continue doing this work. We think it's valuable, and there's still plenty of slack out there. We can, plenty of good deals that we can make, so to speak, for projects to fund. But in the end, these have to be viable businesses. And one of our concerns is we can lower the barrier to entry. We can defray some of the cost of regulation through paying for other consultants and things to get through that. Business planning services, things like that. But in the bottom line is if they can't generate the revenue and profits to stay afloat, that supply is not going to continue to exist. One of the things that we've been trying to push through our program is where's the private investment? If this is a workforce issue and this is an advantage issue for businesses, then we're trying to incent them to put money on the table as well, using state funds, local government funds, and then private funds. We see some really good ideas going out there. But one thing I'm wondering is, from the legislative perspective or Chamber of Commerce, what is the appetite for direct subsidy of their employees to pay for these services so they can pay for high quality services? Because we're making these investments, we want these businesses to be successful.
Who wants to tackle that one?
I'll take that, thank you. Yes, I think that's a question that we hear a lot of times whenever we're talking about this issue. I think it's important to remember that, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of businesses have 100 or less employees. If you're a company that has 8 employees, you're trying to keep your business afloat. And for those 8 employees, that is a really important job to make sure that you're doing what your business is meant to be doing, so that all those people have a stable income and their jobs aren't affected. And so we hear a lot of times that the business community should be making investments in a number of areas and that it should be on them. And so I think while businesses are very good in their communities at being a team player and really trying to give back to the community, you have to be careful to say, this is on you to make this happen, because they're trying to run a business. And if they start just trying to be all things to everybody in the community, then they're not going to run the business well. So I think there is an appetite from the business community to be part of the solution, but I don't know that the answer is asking them to be the ones to keep it afloat. I think, as you've mentioned, it is a real challenge with childcare business because it is such a small margin to make a profit. And so really, we need to be looking at that, because you cannot put something into place and hope that somebody else is just going to fund it all along the way to keep it going. Now, if you say that's the only way that we're going to have childcare, then we really need to go back to the starting place and say, is this the only, there's gotta be a way that these businesses have made it all these years before us, and look to, okay, what can we learn from that, and how can we help these business owners to make a profit and also be a service to the community. I think businesses want to be part of the solution, but they can't be the ones funding and keeping things afloat that maybe aren't, if it's not going to stand on its own at some point, then that's a real concern about what's the longevity of something like that. So I think they want to be part of the solution, but it's got to be more than just them expected to fund it.
Well, she took my answer. And let me maybe just geek out a little bit here real quick, because Stacey's exactly right. These providers are running on very, very thin margins. And I want to go back to the regulatory piece. If we start layering on frivolous violations onto these providers who are making extremely small margins in this child care and preschool business, they're going to do exactly what we've seen. They're going to exit. They're going to find another opportunity. I think the other piece to your question is that we are seeing businesses competing for employees and providing some of these benefits to their employees in order to entice them to come work for them. And that's exactly the type of program that we want to see happen, right? It's not a state mandate to say, and you must provide a child care credit or something like that. I think we can do a better job in our tax system, providing child care credits to families so that it becomes more affordable. And so it becomes more of a holistic approach. As far as the legislature, right, and I think in my new role, and I'm just getting, I haven't worked with this grant program yet, and I'm going to dive into it, but where I see the state's role is really being one of incenting and maybe seeding to get to exactly where Stacey's saying. At some point in time, the industry, the providers, and the families need to be able to stand on their own with some scholarships or some sort of aid to specific families to help them gain access to the services. So I think that's the position that I'm in.
So one thing I would add quickly, having had some conversations with businesses and folks from economic development and cities and community leaders around the state, is one of the challenges they cite, and I hear, is that businesses want to be involved, they want to be part of the solution, they understand this is a real challenge in terms of attracting and retaining employees. I heard a story about a business in Alexandria that was hired an employee from the Twin Cities, and the employee a week or two later turned around and said, I'm actually going to have to decline the job because we looked around and there's just we couldn't find a slot for childcare. So I think they want to be part of the solution. I think the challenge that they always say to me is just that that they kind of need a proposition of, this is what we need from you as a business, and this is what you're going to get in terms of slots, or this is what we're going to be creating, and this is what the benefit is going to be for the community. I don't know how to get there exactly, but I think, from a business perspective, what I often hear from them is, we would like to be a part of the solution, and we're interested in finding ways to partner and finding ways to invest in order to get slots open. But it's oftentimes early on in the process, and we don't have sort of that clear, okay, this is what we're asking, and this is what the outcome's going to be. And I think from what I heard from business owners is, that's really what they need in order to make that decision. Is this is what we're doing, this is what it's going to cost, and this is what we're asking from you all, and this is the number of slots that are going to be available, and this is going to be the impact on the community.
I just want to add to a couple of things. We do have some businesses who they run a child care business within their company, but they do it at a loss. So you have to be realistic. There's only so many companies that can do that, and they count that as a benefit to their employees, and they are happy to do it. We just can't replicate that everywhere is the challenge. It's great when that happens, but I want to point that out, because the business community, they want to do the right thing. But as I mentioned, a smaller business doing the right thing means staying afloat for those 8 employees that they've got employed, right? So, and the other piece I wanted to touch on, as Senator Pratt has talked about the regulations, I think everyone here is in agreement that we want regulations. These are our littlest people, and we want to make sure that they are cared for in the best ways. But the challenge with the regulations is that they're so convoluted and so challenging that it is an incentive killer for somebody to want to go into this industry. And so I think that's another place where the grants, or where the different initiative foundations, or there's other groups out there who really help people run the business side. I think that is another key piece of this, in that you want those things in place, but they've got to be at a point where they're helping the child and helping it to be a quality setting, rather than just shutting the business down altogether.
All right, we've got time for one quick question with quick answers from our panelists.
As a retired pediatrician, 2 years ago, I became aware of how common illiteracy is, or poor reading and writing skills are among our parents. Half the Medicaid, Medicare, and insurance moms can't read very well. We're not really addressing that group, and I think your scholarship program is good, but I don't think many of these women know about it. So I would advocate a home visitor program to all your Medicaid, Medicare, or medical insurance moms, to work with them prenatally through the first 3 years. Literacy skills are best addressed during the first 3 years. Preschool kind of misses that age a little bit. And so I think, how do we get to that most at-risk group instead of being referred? Why not go to them? If you got Medicaid, Medicare, medical insurance, you have to accept a home visitor to come in. And this person doesn't have to be a college degree. It can be a trained mother in the same culture, working with them. Barbara Fabre knows about that. And there are programs out there, but we don't emphasize the illiteracy issue very much, and I think that hurts us greatly.
I guess just to respond, I think one thing I often notice when I work with advocacy groups is that you often have sort of separate advocacy groups that exist. One around sort of maternal and child health. We have folks that are advocating around paid family leave and benefits and things like that, and then we have folks that are in the early childhood space. And I think it's important, and I think just that a lot of these issues are interconnected, and if we can be having broader conversations that bring together those different communities, just think about what are holistic ways that we can look at sort of the interconnection and sort of the various challenges that the most at-risk kids and their families face. I think that would be a benefit to all.
I'll go, and I think the question you bring up, or the comment that you bring up, really extends beyond just early childcare. The state has invested in some of these home visit programs, and we're seeing results from those efforts. We also know that a child's best teacher is their parent, and so we've been investing in adult basic education. In fact, my mom used to teach adult literacy during the summer, her summer months. We know that the most important, if we were to pick one metric to focus on a child's success in their academics, it would be reading at grade level by third grade. And so I actually ran a bill that strengthened our reading by third grade statute. It didn't go quite as far as I would like. I wanted to make sure that we understood the child's, why the child wasn't reading well in third grade. Did they move in from another state? Was English not their primary language? Did they have a learning disability? Were they dyslexic? There's probably a couple of dozen reasons why a student's not reading. We need to be able to not just come in with what I saw in the education committee so often were these blanket programs designed to fit every child, but really tailor the needs. I also want to tell you, because I think it does, I'm going to get a little controversial here, so bear with me. too often what I've seen are students that are struggling in school start too early. They're not ready for school. They're starting as 4.5-year-olds. And I served 12 years on the school board, and when I talked to some of these parents, they did it because they couldn't afford, it was cheaper for them to put their student into school than to continue with the childcare. And it wasn't right for the student. And yet we continue to socially promote these students on. And so I think one of the biggest controversies I had with that bill was to just even mention, not mandate, not require, not suggest, but just to say, maybe holding this student back is the right thing for this student, right? And do it at an early age before it becomes a stigma. My dad was a senior vice president with Bank of America, and he got held back in 2nd and 4th grade. My committee assistant, her nephew was held back in 2nd grade. And she'll say it was the best thing for him because he wasn't ready for school. He wasn't mature enough. Not every child matures at the same level. And so what becomes very, very important is if we're going to talk about funding childcare and preschool and making sure kids are kindergarten ready, then we have to make sure that we're not incenting families to put them in the school too early before they are kindergarten ready.
All right, I want all of you to join me in thanking our panelists for their contribution.
Well, I should have let you speak first.
No, that's
We,
Yes, I would like to take your Well, thank you, John. Is this on? Yep. Thank you, John, for moderating our discussion this morning, and thanks for all the panelists. Can we give them another round of applause, please? And before we break, I want to recognize a few folks. First of all, Representative Dave Penno is here, and Representative Penno, thank you again for joining us. You've been at many of our talks. And we want to congratulate you on your appointment as chair of the new subcommittee on early childhood finance and policy. We're looking forward to working with you. So thank you for your service. I also want to acknowledge board members of Think Small that are in the room today. Tracy Nordstrom, Art Rolnick, Karen Hilding, and Bud Hayden. Can we give them a round of applause? And I'd also like to acknowledge our partner from Minnesota Department of Education with working with Early Learning Scholarship, Sandy Myers, who used to be a member of Think Small staff. Thank you, Sandy, for joining us this morning. Finally, we hope you enjoyed today's discussion and hope you'll join us for our next Small Talks event. This will be Tuesday, March 12th, same place, same time. Our Small Talks discussion topic in March will focus on Minnesota's workforce and how businesses benefit from early childhood education. Thank you all for coming today. Drive safe.
So are you